The text wasn't meant for me, but I read it anyway. I'm Helen, 53, and for 28 years I've been Mark's wife, the constant shadow beside his routines. Our mornings were almost ritualistic. The faint hum of the kettle, the clink of his keys tossed into the bowl, sunlight streaming through curtains that had faded in the same soft place each year. There was warmth in that repetition, a comfort I never thought to question. I used to believe peace was just habit wearing a kind face. That morning smelled of roasted coffee and something familiar. Home, routine, safety. I poured 2 mugs, one chipped at the rim, his favorite, and listened to the soft sound of our house stretching awake. My reflection trembled on the kitchen window as I set his cup down. The moment lingered, still, until the vibration on the counter broke it. A small sound, a simple thing, but it cut through everything ordinary. Mark's phone buzzed once, paused, then again. I might have ignored it if not for the name, hidden under a folder labeled Work. A woman's name, short, unfamiliar, too deliberate. My hand hesitated above the screen, heart knocking hard enough to drown out the clock. Curiosity is such a thin word for the ache that made me swipe it open. The message said, "Last night was perfect. I miss you already." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The sound of the refrigerator's hum became unbearable. My mug slipped, coffee splashed across the counter, creeping toward his papers. The screen dimmed, then brightened again, her name still there, her words soft and cruel. When he walked in, I turned the phone toward him. "Who is she?" He froze. His face didn't twist, didn't panic, just flickered, like a man rehearsing denial. "It's work, Helen. You're reading too much into it." "Work doesn't say, 'I miss you,'" I whispered. He moved closer, voice low, pleading. "Please, don't start this. You know how rumors grow." I stepped back. Silence filled the room, thick enough to choke on. The kettle clicked off behind me, steam rising between us like something living. I looked at the screen again, memorized the words, then hit print before he could reach for the phone. The machine whirred, spitting the proof onto paper. 1 page, black ink on white, a snapshot of betrayal. The sound of it tearing free from the tray stayed in my ears long after. He tried to speak, but I turned away, holding the page like evidence from a crime scene. Outside, a breeze moved the curtains. The light shifted, and suddenly the kitchen looked smaller, the air colder. Every object, our mugs, our photographs, the clock above the sink, became witnesses. I remember thinking, this is the exact second my old life ends. He reached for me, but his hand stopped midair. "Helen, listen." "No," I said quietly. "I've heard enough." His mouth tightened, a flicker of frustration breaking through. The mask cracked, just a little. I folded the page and slipped it into my robe pocket. My pulse steadied with the weight of it, the first tangible truth I'd held in years. The sound of birds outside felt too bright, too normal, almost mocking. I wondered how long he'd been hiding behind that calm smile, how many breakfasts were built on lies. The idea sickened me, yet underneath the hurt, something colder began to form. A vow. Silent but sharp. I turned back toward the window, the reflection of my face ghosting over the glass. "He thinks this will fade," I told myself. "He doesn't know me at all." I pressed the printed page flat against the counter, smoothing the wrinkles with trembling fingers. He swore it was work, but the name said otherwise. His call tone changed when he thought I'd left. I stood in the hallway, one hand on the doorframe, the other gripping my phone. I had told him I was stepping out to the garden, that I'd be gone for a while. Instead, I placed my phone on the counter and hit record. The kettle whistled behind me, and I let the noise cover my retreat. From the next room, I listened to the way silence rearranged itself around his voice. He spoke softly, lower than usual, the words intimate but sharp-edged. "I can't talk long," he said, She's still here." My pulse caught in my throat. There was a pause, a chuckle, then the same tone I used to think was mine alone. "Yes, last night was perfect. I'll find a way." The air in the kitchen changed. Steam curled above the teapot like a warning. The smell of overboiled tea drifted through the air, bitter, burnt, heavy. I'd brewed 1,000 cups before, but never had it turned against me like that. I leaned against the wall, breathing in betrayal. It was everywhere, even in the scent of our mornings. When the call ended, I heard him exhale as if relieved. The clink of his cup followed, casual, routine. He had no idea that every sound was being captured. His tone, his laughter, even the soft scrape of the chair against the floor. Proof, wrapped in ordinary noise. Later that evening, I replayed it. His voice filled the empty kitchen. "You make me feel alive again," he said. My hand trembled, thumb hovering over pause. I let it run until the silence stretched, until the last faint sound of his breath faded. It felt like listening to a ghost speak through my husband's throat. When Anne came by, I told her everything. She didn't gasp or judge, only reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Don't confront him yet," she whispered. "You need more than anger. You need evidence." Her calmness steadied me. I looked down at the teapot between us, the same one I'd used that morning. Its lid rattled slightly from the cooling metal. Rituals, I thought, are fragile things. You repeat them until they turn into lies. "I have the recording," I said quietly. "It's enough for now." Anne's brow furrowed. "Enough to know," she said, "but not enough to prove." She was right. Betrayal needed to be documented, not just felt. I saved the file, labeled it plainly, a personal entry with a date and a short ID that no one would question if they saw it. Then I hid it deep in a folder that only I could access. When I closed the laptop, the faint scent of the tea still lingered. It clung to my hair, my hands, the fabric of my sleeves. I couldn't wash it away. Every time I breathed, it reminded me he had spoken love into someone else's ear while standing in my kitchen. That night, he smiled at me across the table, asked about my day as if nothing had changed. I answered softly, each word measured, almost kind. I wanted to see if guilt would flicker in his eyes. It didn't. His calmness was terrifying. It told me he'd been doing this for a while. I cleared the dishes, placed the ring of his cup on the counter, and stared at the reflection of the overhead light in the metal sink. The echo of his recorded voice looped inside me. "I'll find a way," he had said. He already had. I turned off the light, closed the door behind me, and whispered to myself, "His voice said love, but not to me." Numbers tell truths that hearts conceal. The words echoed in my head as I stood at the counter, pen poised above a withdrawal slip I didn't need to fill. The bank smelled of metal and toner, that faint paper dust scent of other people's lives stacked behind glass. I asked for 6 months of statements from our joint account. The clerk, a polite woman with a patient face, didn't ask why. She just printed the pages and slid them across to me, her eyes flicking up once, reading something in my expression that she didn't dare name. 4 withdrawals leapt off the page like bruises: $2,400, $3,000, $1,750, $2,900, all paid to a florist I had never heard of. The total came to $10,050. I traced each number with my fingertip. The ink was slightly raised, almost textured, cold, impersonal, as if money itself carried the chill of deceit. My throat tightened, but I didn't speak. The clerk's sympathy felt unbearable. Her quiet, careful smile was worse than accusation. I signed where she pointed, took the papers, and slipped them into my bag. Outside, the afternoon light was too bright. The world looked the same, yet nothing was. The street hummed with traffic, indifferent and steady. I walked home slowly, the weight of those pages heavier than their paper should allow. Inside the house, silence waited like a living thing. I placed the ledger on the dining table where we'd shared dinners for years, and it stared back at me, Neat rows of proof disguised as ordinary banking. The air felt thick, unmoving. I reached for my wedding ring, twisting it unconsciously until my skin reddened beneath it. When he came home later, his voice carried its usual warmth. "You're quiet," he said, setting his briefcase down. I nodded. "Just tired." He smiled, almost relieved, and moved past me toward the kitchen. His trust in my silence was staggering. While he cooked, I watched him from the hallway. Every gesture looked practiced now, knife against board, hum under his breath. I thought of the florist's name again. I pictured a woman receiving bouquet after bouquet, paid for with our account. I wondered if she knew the money was mine too. That night I couldn't sleep. The ledger sat on my nightstand, half hidden under a magazine. I turned on the lamp and read it again, line by line, as though I could decode intention from math. Betrayal looked sterile on paper, I realized. No scent, no warmth, just digits and ink and the faint texture of absence. The next morning, I went to the same bank. The clerk saw me and hesitated. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, I just needed a record." Her gaze softened. She understood without details. Gatekeepers always do. At home, I folded the statements carefully, slid them into a file marked simply, "Household." I could feel myself drifting away from him, inch by inch. Meals alone, bed turned to one side, conversations thinning like smoke. Once, while cleaning, I found a stray receipt on the floor. $75, same florist, dated last week. I stared at the tiny printed logo and felt the shape of my new reality form in quiet certainty. Money had spoken the truth he refused to. Later, when he came home with a fresh bouquet, bright lilies tied in white ribbon, I smiled faintly. "Beautiful," I said, my voice calm, almost kind. He looked at me then, searching for something he couldn't find. He asked, "Do you like them?" I touched a petal, soft and waxy under my fingers. "The flowers," I said, "were never meant for me." I found the receipt tucked behind our wedding photo. It slipped out when I dusted the frame, a small curl of paper that fluttered to the floor. The light from the window fell over it, bright and merciless. At first, I thought it was just another bill, something forgotten. But the words printed across the top, "Diamond bracelet," caught my eye. The date was our anniversary. My hand stilled. The reflection of my face bent across the glass of the photo above, distorted beside his smiling one. Below the total, there was one extra line, engraving fee, and beside it 2 letters, LM. I read them again and again. LM. Not my initials. Not anyone I knew. I whispered them under my breath, testing the sound. LM. The letters felt foreign, like they belonged to another world. The light shifted across the table, splitting his smile inside the frame into 2 halves, one familiar, one suddenly false. The proof was simple, almost elegant in its cruelty. While I was home preparing dinner that evening, he'd been engraving love onto someone else's wrist when Anne came by later that afternoon. I showed her the paper. She sat down quietly, reading the receipt twice. Her eyes narrowed, not in shock, but in recognition. "You need to talk to someone," she said finally. I laughed without meaning to. "I just did." "No," she said. "Not me. Someone who writes things down. A counselor, a professional. You'll want this documented." The suggestion stung. I didn't want to become a case file, but she was right. This wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about record, about evidence that wouldn't fade like words shouted into air. That evening, I scheduled an appointment. The act felt mechanical, detached. The counselor's office confirmed the time, 2:00 p.m., Thursday. I hung up and stared at the phone for a long time, wondering when life had started needing proof of its own betrayal. Later, I returned to the frame. The photo was from our wedding day, sunlight spilling through the church doors, his hand over mine. I remembered thinking that light meant truth then, something pure that would never dim. But now, Standing there, the same light only revealed dust and fingerprints. I turned the frame over. On the back, his handwriting was still visible. To us, always. I pressed my thumb against it until the ink smudged. The words didn't mean what they used to. They'd been rewritten by omission. In the distance, the clock ticked. Steady. Relentless. I felt every second stretch, like a thread pulled too tight. I folded the receipt carefully, slid it into an envelope, and wrote the date across the front. It wasn't grief anymore. It was evidence. When Anne called again that night, she asked, "Are you all right?" "No," I said, "but I'm keeping track." She hesitated. "You're sure you want to keep those things?" "Yes." My voice was quiet, but certain. Pain is temporary. Records aren't. As I ended the call, the faint evening light returned, painting the frame and the envelope beside it in the same pale gold. I understood then that memory doesn't protect us. It indicts us. The house was silent, the kind of silence that knows too much. I picked up the receipt once more, feeling the fragile paper between my fingers, thin as breath. I looked at the engraving note, the 2 letters that had redrawn my entire life. He engraved love for her on my anniversary. Confession became documentation. The first time I sat in Dr. Ellis's office, I noticed the cold before anything else. Not just the temperature, though the air felt about 5 degrees too low, but the kind of cold that comes from a room where every word is recorded, not trusted. The walls were pale, bare except for one framed certificate. Her laptop sat open, cursor blinking like it was waiting to measure my pain. She smiled gently. "Take your time," she said. I did. I spoke about the messages, the bank statements, the receipt behind the photo frame, about the quiet way lies collect until you can't tell what part of your life was real. Her fingers typed steadily as I spoke, the rhythm mechanical, like rainfall on metal. After a while I stopped and asked, "Are you writing everything?" She nodded. "Yes, it's part of the record. Documentation ensures safety. When things escalate, the file can protect you." Protect. The word lingered in the air, warmer than the room itself. I glanced at the small clock above her desk. Its tick was soft, precise, but every second felt heavier than the last. I realized I was being archived. Each sentence, each tremor in my voice, transformed into institutional proof. My grief had been turned into entries, time-stamped, dated, cross-referenced. For the first time, my suffering existed in something official. "I don't want him to have that power anymore," I said quietly. "Not over my time, not over my sleep." She didn't look up. "Then write that down," she said. "We'll make it part of the record." I hesitated, then repeated the words slowly. "I will no longer tolerate emotional trespass." She typed them verbatim. The click of her keys felt final, like a door locking shut. When I left her office, the air outside felt too warm, almost stifling after the chill inside. The session lasted exactly 50 minutes. I paid the fee, tucked the printed invoice, a small rectangular proof, reference ID E74A9, into my folder with the others. I was building a paper wall. That night, Mark suggested dinner. He lit candles, poured wine, spoke softly, his tone rehearsed and steady. "We can fix this," he said. "We've been through worse." "We?" I asked. The word tasted bitter. He smiled, leaning closer. "You know I love you, right?" His charm had always been his favorite weapon, gentle persuasion wrapped in regret. But I'd already marked my boundary. I set the wine glass down untouched. "Not tonight." He blinked. The mask slipped for a second, something hard flashing behind his eyes. "So that's it?" "Yes," I said. "That's it." For a moment, silence filled the space between us, thick and humming. He picked up his fork, stabbed at the food, then left it untouched. The intimidation was subtle, a deliberate stillness, a test of fear. I didn't flinch. Later I wrote about it in my notebook before bed. 2 lines, attempted reconciliation, denied consent, response, withdrawal. The record continued. The next week, Dr. Ellis handed me a printout from our previous session. Each line precise, time-stamped, emotion distilled into structure. I traced the first sentence with my fingertip. Client expresses awareness of manipulation, seeks autonomy. It didn't sound like me, but maybe that was the point. The file wasn't for comfort. It was for clarity. "Do you feel safer?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "No," I said, "but I feel stronger." The clock ticked. Again. Somewhere outside, a car horn blared, pulling me back to the present. I realized strength doesn't always arrive loudly. It sometimes comes disguised as paperwork. Before leaving, she closed her notepad and said, "You've done well today." I nodded. The air felt slightly warmer this time. Maybe it wasn't the room that had changed. Maybe it was me. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard the faint sound of her pen clicking closed behind me. Her pen clicked. My story became official. He tried to break me through the bank. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, pale and official-looking. The texture of the paper felt coarse under my thumb, the kind that carried bad news. I tore it open and unfolded the letter. The words blurred for a moment, then sharpened into focus. Account withdrawal, $4,600. Authorization confirmed. My name was printed neatly, and beside it, his forged signature, confident as ever. I sat down at the kitchen table. The air around me seemed to thicken. Every object looked foreign, the pen on the counter, the folded napkin, even the quiet hum of the fridge. My hands trembled, but not from surprise. Betrayal was no longer a shock. It had become a pattern. Still, this was something new. He'd taken my name, my credit, my trust, and turned them into currency. I drove straight to the bank. The manager recognized me. We'd spoken before about joint accounts. Her tone softened when I placed the letter on her desk. "May I see the reference ID?" she asked. I pointed to the bottom of the page. "It's right there. Entry G91F2. She typed for a long moment, the sound of keys filling the silence. Finally, she looked up. "It was done in person," she said carefully. "Your husband signed both sections." "He forged it," I replied. "I wasn't there. I never gave consent." She hesitated. "Would you like to file a formal notice?" "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake this time. "Today." She slid a form toward me, her eyes quiet, watchful. As I filled it out, I felt the faint grit of the paper under the pen. Every stroke of ink was an act of defiance. I signed my name slowly, deliberately, reclaiming it letter by letter. When she stamped the document, the sound cracked like a gavel. "Verified." "Once this is processed," she said, "he'll be contacted directly. He'll have to respond in person." The words steadied me. For weeks I'd been cornered by emotion. Now the power was shifting, transferring from heartache to paperwork. That evening, he called. His tone was sharp, rehearsed. "Why did you go to the bank?" "I didn't go," I said quietly. "I filed." There was a pause. "You're overreacting." "You stole my name." He laughed once, low and humorless. "You always dramatize things. No one's going to believe you." "Then they'll see the records," I said, "signed and sealed." The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was calculation. I could almost hear him deciding his next move. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "You're making this ugly." It already was. I hung up before he could finish. My pulse raced, but underneath it was something steadier, a rhythm I hadn't felt in months. I took the notice letter from my folder and ran my fingers across the embossed seal. Its texture was rough, uneven, but real. Proof had a weight emotion never could. That night, I wrote down the numbers in my notebook. $4,600 withdrawn. Notice filed. Response pending. I underlined each word twice. The fear was still there, yes, but now it sounded different. Less like a storm, more like a countdown. The next morning, the bank manager called back. "It's moving forward," she said. "He'll have to appear. They said he'd have to answer in person." Whispers can kill slower than knives. It started with glances, neighbors pausing mid-step when I walked by, their smiles too brief, their greetings too polite. The air around our cul-de-sac began to hum with something unspoken. I didn't need to read the post to know. Still, curiosity won. On the community forum, under a thread titled, "Private Lives, Public Lies," someone had written about the woman who spied on her husband. No names, no details, just enough for everyone to know it was me. The scent of perfume drifted through the morning air as I stood on the porch, the faint sweetness from the lilac bush mixing with something sharper, gossip. It spread invisibly, carried in laughter, in casual questions, in sympathy that was never sincere. I could almost hear the whispers floating across lawns like smoke. By evening, 2 neighbors dropped by, just to check in. Their words were careful, edged with curiosity. "You must be exhausted," one said. "So much talk." I nodded, holding the doorframe for balance. It felt like standing in a courtroom where the verdict had already been whispered. I stopped attending the book club, stopped walking the same route in the mornings. Every porch light on that street felt like an eye watching me. On Sunday, I went to church. Reverend Cole spoke about honesty, about how truth can sound like betrayal when people prefer their peace undisturbed. "Sometimes," he said, "we crucify the witness and forgive the lie." His gaze flicked briefly toward me, then back to the pulpit. The congregation listened quietly, shifting in their seats. I could feel their discomfort ripple like a low tide. The perfumed woman 2 pews ahead fanned herself slowly, the scent rising again, sweet, then sour. The air thickened. When the hymn began, voices faltered on the refrain. After the service, Cole stopped me near the door. "You did the right thing," he said softly, "but rightness rarely wins popularity contests." I smiled faintly. "Popularity isn't my goal." He nodded. "Good. Then you'll survive this." Outside, sunlight glared off the windshields in the parking lot, harsh and clean. The same neighbors who once waved now avoided my eyes. It was strange how silence could feel heavier than accusation. That afternoon, I received another message, this time from a woman I barely knew. "You don't deserve what they're saying," she wrote. "I heard him at the store, bragging about how you were losing your mind." So the rumor had turned full circle. He'd planted it himself, weaponized my isolation. I stared at the screen, the words pulsing under my thumb. My pulse steadied, not with fear this time, but with something sharper. Resolve. I met Cole again the next day. He offered me tea in his small office, walls lined with books and framed verses. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood. "You're building witnesses," he said. "Keep notes, every name, every comment. Truth needs a trail." "I already have one," I said, handing him a folder. Inside were printed copies of the posts, screenshots of replies, and timestamps. Entry D12C5 through D12C9. That's how they've been framing me. He scanned a page and frowned. "This is targeted." "Yes," I said, "but it's also proof." The next Sunday, his sermon changed tone. He spoke of forgiveness, but he wove in something new: accountability. "When truth threatens comfort," he said, "cowards call it gossip. The brave call it awakening." His voice filled the sanctuary, steady and calm. A few faces hardened. Others lowered their eyes. By the time I stepped outside, I knew the war had changed shape. It wasn't between him and me anymore. It was between truth and the story he'd sold them. The stakes were clear now: reputation versus reality. The forum thread might have started as rumor, but it had given me something he couldn't control: witnesses. I folded my coat tighter as a cool breeze swept across the street. The scent of perfume lingered faintly in the air, the last trace of what once disguised itself as sweetness. By Sunday, even the pews turned cold. A file can outlast love. Ms. Grant's office smelled faintly of ink and leather, the air dense with quiet authority. She stacked folders one by one, each labeled and dated, until they formed a small fortress between us. "Every page matters," she said, aligning the edges with surgical precision. "Each one builds weight." The sound of paper sliding, the steady shuffle of documents. It became my new heartbeat. I watched her staple the latest affidavit, the metal bite sharp and final. "You'll need to be ready," she continued. "Retaliation is almost certain. Men like him don't surrender, they counter." Her words didn't scare me. They clarified the stakes. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a case. Every proof I'd collected, recordings, receipts, therapy, transcripts, now had form and voice. I passed her the folder marked Entry H38L7, a compilation of communications he'd sent to the bank after the fraud complaint. She flipped through, eyes narrowing. "Forged tone," she murmured. "See this phrase? He's mimicking your writing style to look cooperative. It's clever, but sloppy." A faint click echoed as she set her pen down. "We'll answer through the system, not emotion. That's how he loses control." Outside her window, the city pulsed. Orderly chaos. The world looked normal, but my life had narrowed to paper, procedure, and proof. Later that afternoon, she drafted our reply, a formal memorandum addressed to the institutional board, acknowledging the complaint and confirming the evidence audit. The words felt clinical, but powerful. Each sentence replaced what used to be tears. When I signed the final page, my hand didn't tremble. "Will they respond quickly?" I asked. "Institutions move slow," she said, "but they remember everything." The next few days blurred into a rhythm of calls and scanned entries. Each proof file had its own code, each timestamp another reminder that emotion fades, but documentation endures. I began sleeping with a folder beside my bed, the corner pressed into the mattress like a talisman. The sound of stapling echoed in my dreams, steady, metallic, exact. Then his counter arrived, a letter from his firm, typed on thick paper, its tone both polite and poisonous. It accused me of defamation, emotional instability, and financial obstruction. Ms. Grant read it twice, then handed it back with a faint smile. "He's overreaching," she said. "This isn't defense, it's intimidation." What do? We respond once, through verified authority. She dictated the response herself, every line careful and unyielding. "In reference to your correspondence, the claims lack substantiation and contradict existing records under reference ID F22B3, institutional review pending." I watched her initial the document. "This acknowledgement," she said, "isn't just a reply. It's a signal to the system that we trust the process more than his threats." Trust the process. It sounded simple, but I understood its weight. Systems don't love or hate, they log, and logs don't forget. By Friday, an official envelope arrived, thin, embossed, bearing the insignia of the court. I held it for a long moment before opening it, the faint hum of the stapler still echoing in my memory. The summons lay inside, crisp and cold. My eyes traced the ink, each letter precise and deliberate. His name was printed in full. The summons had his name embossed in ink. He broke the frame before admitting the truth. The crash came without warning, a single violent sound that split the air. I turned toward the living room, and there it was, our wedding photo, face down, glass shattered across the floor. The frame had always hung perfectly centered above the mantel, steady through decades of seasons. Now it lay crooked, bleeding light through its fractured edges. He stood beside it, breathing hard, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "You've turned me into a criminal," he said. "You had no right." I stayed still. "You did that yourself." "By calling a lawyer? By embarrassing me?" His voice cracked into a growl. Anne was already there, barefoot, drawn from the guest room by the sound. She stepped between us, her hands raised slightly. "Stop, both of you." He ignored her, pointing toward the papers stacked neatly on the table. "You think you can build a case out of love letters and therapy notes? You think anyone will believe you?" I didn't move. The light from the window fell across the mess at our feet, turning the shards into tiny verdicts. "I don't need belief," I said quietly. "I have proof." He laughed, but there was no humor in it, just exhaustion and fear. "You're destroying your own life," he said, "all because you couldn't let go." Anne's voice wavered. "Please, Mark, just leave for tonight." He turned sharply toward her. "Stay out of this." The moment stretched. His anger wasn't about the lawyer. It was about losing control. I could see it in the way his hand hovered near the broken frame, fingers trembling like he might strike again. But he didn't. Instead, he picked up one of the shards, stared at it, and muttered, "This was our home." "It still is," I said, "but not your weapon." He froze, and for a second his shoulders sagged. Then the shard slipped from his hand, slicing the skin near his palm. Blood welled quickly, red against the pale glass. He cursed under his breath, clutching the wound. Anne grabbed a towel, pressing it into his hand. "You need to go," she said, "before this turns into something worse." He looked up at me, eyes full of disbelief, almost pleading. "You're not the woman I married." "No," I said. "I'm the one who survived her." The silence afterward felt heavier than the argument. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. The light shifted, catching on a stray fragment by my shoe. I crouched to pick it up, and for a moment, I saw our old reflection in it. Two people smiling at a version of themselves that never really existed. Then the image cracked, and all that remained was my own face, older, steadier, unflinching. Anne began sweeping the glass, her movements slow, deliberate. "Do you want me to call the police?" she asked softly. "Not yet," I said, "but write down what happened. Time, words, everything." She nodded, understanding without question. We were both witnesses now. When he finally left, slamming the door behind him, the air seemed to tremble with relief and danger all at once. I sank into the chair near the window, staring at the streaks of blood on the hardwood. The light had changed. Dusk now, softer but unforgiving. Confrontation doesn't end chaos. It redefines it. The boundary was drawn, but the cost was visible in every fracture, every drop that darkened the floor. His blood dripped where the glass fell. The courthouse smelled of paper and fear. The scent hit first. Old parchment, toner, sweat, and something colder, like tension that had been waiting years for this morning. The hallway buzzed with muted voices and footsteps echoing off marble. I clutched the folder tighter, its edges soft from handling, the stamped forms inside a heartbeat away from history. Ms. Grant walked beside me, calm as ever. "Once it's filed," she whispered, "it becomes real. No more whispers, no more hiding." "I'm ready," I said, though my pulse disagreed. At the clerk's window, I slid the papers forward. My hand trembled slightly as the woman behind the glass inspected them, her eyes scanning the lines without expression. She reached for the metal stamp, aligned it perfectly, and pressed down. The sound was small, a hollow thunk, but it filled the room like a gavel. Protective injunction. Case number 47B2A1. That was the number that changed everything. Ms. Grant gave a faint nod. "You've just drawn the line he can't cross." I exhaled slowly. My breath fogged the glass. The smell of ink rose again, sharp and sterile. "It feels strange," I said. "Signing for safety." "It's not strange," she replied. "It's survival." Outside, rain tapped against the courthouse steps, steady and thin. The sky had turned the color of steel, neutral, unbothered by anyone's pain. I paused at the landing, watching people pass beneath umbrellas, each unaware that my name had just entered a public record. A vow formed quietly in my chest. No more fear disguised as patience. We took a seat on a wooden bench near the clerk's office. Ms. Grant opened her briefcase and checked the copies. "Everything's logged. The judge will review within 48 hours. If he violates the order, it's contempt." 48 hours, I repeated. "That's how long I've been waiting for years." She glanced at me, measuring the weight behind the words. "You'll start to breathe differently now." The smell of paper lingered. It mixed with the faint scent of rain as the door opened and closed, ushering in fragments of the outside world. Somewhere down the hall, a printer started its rhythm, mechanical, relentless. It reminded me that institutions, unlike people, never tire. They record, they file, they stamp. I looked at my signature again, the ink still glistening slightly. For the first time, it didn't feel like proof of identity. It felt like evidence of will. A man in a suit brushed past, muttering into his phone. "Caseload's heavy," he said. "Everything's piling up." I wanted to tell him that some piles aren't paper. They're lives waiting to be believed. Ms. Grant rose, smoothing her jacket. "You did well," she said. "He'll find out soon enough." "He'll hear it from his lawyer," I said, my voice steady now. "That's the only way left for him to listen." We walked toward the elevator. The hall stretched endlessly, lined with bulletin boards and fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. Each step sounded louder than it should have, as if the building itself was amplifying my resolve. Halfway to the doors, I stopped. "What happens next?" She turned slightly. "Now," she said, "we wait for his reaction, and we document it." The folder under my arm felt heavier, but this time the weight wasn't fear. It was proof. When the elevator opened, a faint breeze stirred the edges of the stamped order. I caught a glimpse of the top page. My name, his name, the seal of the court. The institutional world had spoken. As we stepped out into the corridor below, voices rose from the courtroom ahead. A clerk called another case, the syllables sharp and echoing through the stone walls. Then, clear and undeniable, I heard it. His name. His name echoed through the courtroom hall. He looked smaller when the truth was read aloud. The courtroom felt colder than I remembered. Marble walls, wooden benches, and the faint buzz of an old microphone testing the limits of silence. The clerk's voice echoed through the room, steady and rehearsed. "Case number 47B21, County versus Respondent." He sat at the defense table, shoulders hunched, tie crooked, the confidence that once filled every room, now a pale echo. My sister sat 2 rows behind me, clutching her cross so tightly I could hear the faint creak of the chain. Around us, neighbors whispered names, half-formed sympathies, and sharp judgments. When the judge entered, all sound collapsed. Her robe swept across the floor like a shadow of finality. "We'll proceed," she said. "Please rise for the reading." The affidavit lay open before her. The first page trembled slightly under the air vent's draft. Her voice carried each word with surgical precision, slicing through years of denial. Affiant states that on multiple occasions, verbal threats and financial manipulation were used as coercive tools. Evidence includes verified transaction records and correspondence between parties. Exhibit C, digital message, reference 9A3D7. Every syllable landed like a nail sealing a coffin. I felt my throat tighten. The air tasted of dust and tension. He shifted in his chair, muttering something to his lawyer. "Those messages were taken out of context," he said, voice cracking. The judge didn't flinch. "Context doesn't erase timestamps." The murmurs behind me grew louder, whispers swelling, retreating, then silencing again. For the first time, truth wasn't something fragile or private. It was broadcast through a microphone, amplified, irreversible. Ms. Grant sat beside me, her notepad open, every move composed. She leaned in. "Stay still," she whispered. "They're hearing what they were never meant to." The clerk continued, reading from the verified proof packet. Notice type, protective order, authority, Court of County, hard detail, valid until December 31st. I caught a faint gasp from somewhere in the crowd, someone who knew him, maybe someone who once believed him. I didn't turn to see. My eyes stayed fixed on the document, the ink, the stamp, the institutional pulse that had finally aligned with justice. He stood abruptly, face flushed. "I was provoked," he said. "She's twisting everything." The judge's gavel struck once. "Sit down." He froze, then lowered himself slowly, eyes darting to the floor. The sound of the gavel lingered in the air, a hard echo that seemed to outlast reason itself. The prosecutor rose next, methodical and calm. "For the record, Your Honor, the respondent's statements contradict verified entries in the institutional ledger dated March 18th and April 2nd. We have confirmation through third-party witnesses and corroborating documents." The word confirmation settled deep inside me, years of disbelief condensed into that single syllable. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the sound of the microphone hum fill the gap between rage and relief. When I opened them again, I saw him, head lowered, face pale, lips pressed into a thin line. The man who once ruled every conversation now looked lost inside his own silence. My sister whispered a prayer behind me. The scent of old wood and paper filled my lungs, strangely grounding, almost kind. Then the judge spoke one last time. "This court acknowledges institutional validation of the petitioner's claims. Enforcement of the order begins immediately." The clerk stamped the ruling. The thud of rubber-meeting paper was louder than any shout. I exhaled for the first time in hours. He didn't look at me as the room stirred, people rising, murmuring, adjusting their coats. The sound of footsteps mixed with low conversation. But he stayed seated, staring straight ahead. When the bailiff called adjournment, I stood. My knees wobbled but held. I turned once, not to gloat, not to gawk, just to see if he would meet my eyes. He didn't. He couldn't meet my eyes when verdict adjourned. News made our pain marketable. It began with the glare of a camera lens, cold, unblinking, merciless. I hadn't even reached the courthouse steps when a reporter shouted my name. The sound of it, stretched across airwaves and sidewalk, made me feel like a headline before I'd even spoken. Microphones multiplied like judgment, and the bright flashes carved light across my face until I couldn't tell if I was squinting from the sun or the shame. "Do you have a comment about the injunction?" one of them asked. I said nothing. Silence, I'd learned, could be louder than confession. They followed anyway, each footstep clicking like a verdict being recorded. Somewhere behind me, I heard the echo of his voice, soft, performative. He was giving his side to another camera, the same tone he once used to charm dinner guests. "None of it's true," he said. "She's unwell. It's sad, really." Gaslight repackaged for public viewing. The courthouse doors shut behind me, muffling the noise for a heartbeat. Inside, Ms. Grant handed me a small folded note. "It aired," she whispered. "Local station. 5 minutes prime time." 5 minutes. That's all it took to condense years of silence, humiliation, and recovery into a consumable segment between weather and sports. I sat on the bench outside the hearing room, hands clasped tight. Through the glass window, I could still see the flicker of light from the news van parked across the street. It pulsed faintly. Camera flash, camera flash, camera flash, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine anymore. By noon, the phones started ringing. Old friends, former colleagues, voices I hadn't heard in years, each carrying a different tone, some disbelief, some pity, some relief that it wasn't their story. "I saw you," one said softly. "You looked strong." But I hadn't felt strong. I'd felt dissected. That night, Reverend Cole called me to his parish. "You should come," he said. "It's not about forgiveness. It's about reclaiming narrative." The church smelled faintly of wax and rain. A few candles burned low at the altar, their light unsteady but kind. He stood at the pulpit, calm and deliberate, and began his sermon. "Truth aired still purifies," he said. "Even when it comes wrapped in shame, even when the world tries to twist it into entertainment. What was hidden in darkness now walks in daylight, and daylight, though harsh, heals." People bowed their heads. Some glanced at me. The shame that had lived like a bruise beneath my skin shifted. It didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It felt less like exposure and more like exorcism. Afterward, he approached quietly. "They used your pain for profit," he said. "But in doing so, they gave you proof you never could have bought." I nodded. "Proof costs more than pride," I murmured. Outside, the night air carried the faint hum of the broadcast replaying on nearby televisions. I could hear my own voice echo through shop windows and apartment walls, words stripped of nuance, replayed until they no longer sounded like me. Yet for the first time, I didn't flinch. He'd spent years controlling the narrative. Now the narrative was uncontrollable. The light that once blinded me now revealed him. I walked home beneath a dozen streetlights, each one a small interrogation, each one a reminder that hiding was no longer an option. The ring on my hand caught one of those lights and flickered. It used to symbolize promise. Now it marked endurance. When I reached my door, the phone buzzed again. A stranger's message this time. "You don't know me, but I watched. Thank you for speaking." I didn't reply, but I read it twice, then 3 times. By evening, strangers spoke my truth for me. Applause feels hollow when it replaces apology. The community hall was packed. Folding chairs creaked, voices hushed, air thick with something between curiosity and fatigue. The same faces that once turned away from me now watched, waiting for him to speak. He stood at the front, the letter in his trembling hand, light from the high window cutting across his face like an invisible cross. He didn't look up. He just began to read. "For the lies that took years to build," he said quietly, "and the harm they caused, directly or through silence, I take responsibility." His voice cracked. Paper rustled in his hands. The sound carried through the hall, softer than forgiveness, but heavier than noise. I sat 2 rows back, my palms flat against the wooden bench. The texture felt coarse, grounding. Each splinter reminded me of every year I'd spent sitting still while others spoke for me. He paused mid-sentence, exhaling through clenched teeth. "This is long overdue." Someone in the back whispered, "At least he's saying something." No one replied. The silence that followed was not peace. It was the sound of a crowd deciding whether to believe him. When he finished, he folded the letter twice, then again, until it was small enough to disappear into his shaking hand. The moderator, a calm-faced woman from the local council, nodded. "Would you like this entered into the community record?" He hesitated. "If she agrees." All eyes turned toward me. I rose slowly, my heartbeat sinking with the faint hum of the ceiling fans. "Keep it," I said. "Words are evidence, too." There was no triumph in my voice, only clarity. Applause began, uneven, uncertain. Some clapped out of duty, others out of relief that the tension was ending. A few remained still, arms crossed, unwilling to endorse either side. The sound filled the room, but it didn't reach me. It felt hollow, echoing against years that couldn't be erased by a single signature. Afterward, he approached, letter now folded into a clean rectangle. "I meant it," he said. "I know," I replied. "That's not the same as feeling it." He looked down at the floor, then extended the paper toward me. "Take it. You earned this." I didn't move. "No," I said softly. "It belongs to the truth now, not to me." The moderator stepped forward, retrieving the document. "It'll be archived with the settlement file," she said. "Officially closed." "Closed," I repeated. The word felt strange, like a door shutting on a house that no longer belonged to either of us. Outside, the afternoon sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the churchyard beside the hall. The light hit the bench where we'd once sat together years ago, talking about plans, pretending the world was small and safe. I walked past it without stopping. The wooden slats looked newly painted, but I could still trace the grain where weather had once bitten deep. As people filed out, small conversations sparked, half-hearted, polite. "You did the right thing," someone murmured to me. "It's over now." But I knew better. Justice doesn't end in a filing cabinet. It lingers, in the way people look at you differently, in the subtle pause before they say your name. He lingered near the door, one hand on the frame, the other tucked into his coat pocket. "Maybe someday," he said, You'll forgive me." "Maybe," I answered, "but not for your peace." His eyes dropped again, and for the briefest moment I thought I saw regret, but it flickered out too quickly to be sure. The crowd began to thin. The hum of small talk replaced the tension, and the faint rustle of paper echoed as the moderator sealed the letter into a transparent envelope. I turned to leave, catching the glint of the seal catching light. It was done, documented, stamped, entered. Imperfect, but real. As I stepped outside, a cool wind lifted the edges of my coat. Somewhere behind me, a door closed. He left the letter, but not remorse. Silence became company instead of punishment. The first morning alone, I woke to the hum of the heater cycling off. No footsteps, no phone ringing, just the sound of air settling, of the house breathing again. For years that quiet had terrified me. Now it sounded almost like affection. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and something colder, fresh air sneaking through the open window. I let it in on purpose this time. The breeze slid across the counter, fluttering the edge of the journal that sat beside my mug. Its pages, once stiff with fear, had softened over time, paper absorbing not just ink, but endurance. I wrote one line before speaking a word. The quiet stayed, and so did I. Anne stopped by later, carrying her usual smile and 2 lemon muffins. "You're actually opening the windows again," she said. "I'm learning to trust the air," I replied. She laughed softly, pulling out the same garden chair we used last spring. Back then, conversation came in fragments, broken, tentative, padded with distraction. Today, it flowed. We spoke of the past like it belonged to a different house entirely. When she left, I sat outside for a while, the mug cooling in my hands. The temperature had dropped to 42 degrees, but the chill didn't bother me. It was clean, almost ceremonial. The garden still bore scars from neglect, soil uneven, vines reaching where they shouldn't, but even the mess felt alive. Somewhere inside that imperfection, I heard the faint echo of promise. I turned back toward the door. On the entryway table sat the court's stamped letter, folded neatly, untouched for days. I hadn't framed it, hadn't buried it, just left it there, part of the architecture now, like memory embedded in the wood. The clock ticked once, steady. I didn't count the seconds. For the first time, time itself wasn't the enemy. I sat with my journal again, flipping back through entries. Some pages were stained with tears I no longer remembered shedding, others filled with clipped sentences like "proof filed" or "boundary held." But near the end, the handwriting had changed. Firmer, balanced. I traced a finger over one sentence written last week. "Forgiveness is optional. Peace is mandatory." I closed the book, feeling its weight. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of damp leaves. The warmth inside felt measured, earned, not given. I poured another cup of coffee, steam curling upward like a small reminder that not all vanishing is loss. Later that evening, I walked through each room slowly. The hallway light cast long, steady shadows. My reflection in the window looked different, not younger, not softer, but certain. Every wall, every creak, every surface knew the story now. Nothing here needed hiding. Before bed, I stepped out onto the porch. The sky had turned the color of pewter, calm and heavy. Somewhere a bird rustled against the fence. I whispered into the stillness, "It's done." No echo came back, and that was enough. Peace wasn't the absence of memory. It was its transformation. I went inside, placed the journal back on the shelf, and turned off the light. The darkness didn't swallow me. It settled around me like fabric, familiar, forgiving. Peace had weight I could finally lift. Morning light no longer accused me. It stretched across the courthouse steps, clean and bright, warming the stone that once felt like judgment. The same sun that had watched my humiliation now followed me like quiet acknowledgement. Ledger Hill looked smaller today, or maybe I finally stood taller. Inside, the marble floor echoed under my shoes. The clerk behind the counter, a woman with gray at her temples and kindness in her eyes, greeted me with a smile. "Here for the archive?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Final submission, reference copies." The folder felt heavy in my hands, though it held only 26 pages. Weight wasn't about paper. It was about everything that came before it. Every signature, every affidavit, every moment I thought no one would believe me, now flattened neatly between two covers stamped with the court seal. She flipped open the first page, scanning for the identification tag. "Looks complete," she murmured, tapping the corner. "You're donating it to public record?" "For future reference," I said, repeating her phrase like a prayer. The light spilled across the marble desk, sharp and golden. It caught the metal edges of the file clasp, flashing once, like the story was bowing out with ceremony. She placed a small slip inside. "Entry ID 14B7C, she said. "Permanent storage." Permanent. That word held more grace than I expected. I watched her slide the folder into the collection bin, among a dozen other histories. Cases of fraud, custody, property, promises kept and broken. Mine would sit among them, quiet but undefeated. "Do you want a copy for yourself?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I lived it. That's enough." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock above the counter ticked once, then again, steady as a heartbeat. Out the window, sunlight struck the courthouse lawn. The oak trees swayed gently, their leaves catching fragments of gold. A memory flickered, standing in that same spot 2 years earlier, waiting for a verdict that felt like a verdict on my soul. Now, the same place felt like witness, not wound. When I turned back, she was closing the drawer. "It's strange," she said quietly. "We don't always get to see closure walk through the door." "Closure doesn't walk," I replied. "It returns." Her smile deepened, small but knowing. Outside, the world looked redefined, edges softer, shadows thinner. The courthouse bell struck once, its tone spreading through the cold morning like a reminder that some endings don't echo, they settle. I walked down the steps slowly, sunlight brushing the top of my hand. In my bag was a receipt stamped in blue ink, confirmation of deposit. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just a piece of proof that the system had absorbed my story, that it would outlive the gossip, the whispers, the trial. Ledger Hill shimmered faintly in the distance. The morning wind carried the faint hum of traffic and birdsong together, a strange harmony that felt like relief. At the bottom of the hill, I paused and looked back. The windows glowed. Somewhere inside, that folder now rested, its pages marked by dates, signatures, evidence numbers. Each line no longer mine alone, but part of a record that couldn't be edited, erased, or spun into rumor again. I thought about what Anne once said after the broadcast aired. "Justice is the truth that stays standing when the noise dies." She'd been right. The noise had finally died. The light followed me a few more steps before it thinned into ordinary daylight. I didn't chase it. I didn't need to. Behind me, the clerk gently pushed the drawer shut. The file closed with a soft click. He once said, "You'll never speak." I did. The room was smaller than I imagined, but it carried the weight of silence like a cathedral. Rows of chairs faced a modest podium. A microphone waited, its red light blinking, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, faint afternoon light bled through the window, soft enough to blur the sharpness of memory. I held my essay in trembling hands, 12 pages, double-spaced, printed cleanly on white paper. The title read, "The Quiet That Fought Back." Months had passed since the final filing, enough time for the noise to settle, for truth to harden into history. Yet as I stood there, the air felt alive again, like the first breath after drowning. A man in the front row adjusted his glasses, nodding in encouragement. I recognized him from the courthouse, an observer back then, a listener now. The circle had closed without ceremony. When the moderator called my name, my pulse slowed instead of racing. "Thank you for sharing your piece," she said softly. I stepped forward, the paper rustling like dry leaves in my hands. "This essay," I began, "wasn't meant for applause. It was meant for record." The first paragraph came out steady. Words that once belonged to whispers now floated through air, full-bodied, undeniable. "I vowed to uncover lies. I found my voice." The phrase landed like a bridge between two lives, the woman who once signed affidavits in fear and the one now reading under light. Every sentence carried fragments of years, courtrooms, letters, bruised trust, regained ground. I remembered each detail as I spoke, the stamp of Case 47B31, the cold bench outside the chamber, the echo of his last defense falling flat. But now those moments served as evidence of endurance, not ruin. Halfway through, I glanced up. The audience wasn't crying. They were listening, deeply, respectfully. That was the kindest reaction I could have hoped for. A woman near the aisle clasped her hands. Her eyes glimmered with the recognition of something she'd lived too. "The sound of silence," I read aloud, "used to terrify me. Now it reminds me that peace speaks without needing to be loud." Someone in the back whispered, "Amen." Barely audible, but it carried like music. The pen motif returned in my mind. How many times I had pressed it into paper, demanding justice, writing survival into existence. That same pen now rested in my pocket, ink nearly gone. It had done its job. When I finished, there was no dramatic pause. The room filled with soft applause, measured, real, unforced. The sound folded time. In that sound, I heard every denial, every attempt to erase me, turning instead into rhythm. I stepped back from the microphone. The moderator whispered, "Would you like to donate a copy to the archive?" I nodded. "Yes, let it belong to more than me." The printed essay was placed inside a manila envelope marked with a small reference number. Publication record 81J9F. It would sit among stories of resilience, underlined by quiet triumphs no one could take back. As people approached to thank me, I saw in their faces that it was no longer about my pain. It was about proof that survival can sound like grace. When the crowd began to thin, I stood by the window, watching sunlight fade across the floor. The light didn't accuse anymore. It forgave. A faint hum from the building's ventilation joined the echo of applause still circling the room. A gentle sound, not of noise, but of arrival. I whispered one last line to the reflection in the glass, not as confession, but as confirmation. "You said I'd never speak." The reflection smiled back. The vow ended as victory, softly spoken.